on developing basically technologies and information systems related to helping with recovery from the Rwandan genocide. And many of the authors have been working on this for a long time, and the one presenting today is Daisy Yu from the University of Washington, and I'll let her introduce all the other authors.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daisy Yu from University of Washington, Value Sensitive Design Research Lab. I'm very happy to be here today to share our work on multi-lifespan design thinking. Our paper has two foci. On the one hand, it's a design method paper. On the other hand, we provide a theoretical framework for the concept of transitional justice and what it means to work with diaspora population coming from post-conflict societies. In this talk today, I will focus on the design methods, but anything that I don't cover during the talk, I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards. This study, as Juan Pablo introduced so wonderfully, is part of a very long-term design project called Voices from the Rwanda Tribunal. At the heart of this project is a collection of video interviews from people who worked at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which is also known as the ICTR. It is a special court that the UN established in response to the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. It's the first kind of international justice system since the Nuremberg, and the first court in history to have delivered verdicts against persons responsible for committing genocide based on the UN Genocide Convention of 1948. The ICTR was also the very first institution in the world to recognize rape as a means of perpetrating genocide. So the court is of great historical importance in many ways. The project Voices from the Rwanda Tribunal was launched in 2008 and has been introduced to the CHI community multiple times since. And hopefully you will continue to see new research emerge around this project for a very long time. Specifically, the paper we discussed today builds on our prior work published at CHI 2013. At that time, we developed a participatory design method called Envisioning Workshops. The goal was to understand how the people of Rwanda would envision future information systems for providing better access to the Voices from the Rwanda Tribunal interview collection. So in summer 2012, we traveled to 3 provincial cities in Rwanda and worked with 109 Rwandan participants. The Envisioning Workshops was proved effective in bringing together participants from diverse backgrounds. Most importantly, we saw people from survivor communities and perpetrator communities coming together to collaborate on a design project. At the same time, we gained better insights into how we might significantly improve the method. Particularly, we felt the need to explore the element of time more deeply and explicitly when we collaborate to envision futures. So time is a very important consideration for our project as we emphasize multi-lifespan design thinking. In an attempt to provide an alternative to a fast-paced design cycle that is very much widespread in the field of HCI, back in 2010, Batya, Friedman, and Lisa Nathan introduced multi-lifespan design approach, calling for HCI designers and researchers to engage in critical societal problems that are unlikely to be solved within a single human lifespan. Genocide, HIV/AIDS, deforestation, habitat destruction, and species extinction. There are significant problems that defy short-term solutions. Some losses are just too grave that they are not likely to be made up within the time frame of a single human lifespan. And we believe that there are possible opportunities and roles for design and technology to help construct longer-term solutions to such problems. Taking this multi-lifespan perspective, we focus on co-generating long-term visions with Rwandan participants to guide our design. Our aim here is to stimulate participants to move outside the narrow conditions of the present situation especially when the present situation is highly unstable and conflictual, which is often, if not always, the case when working in societies undergoing post-conflict transitional justice process. And instead, we wanted to shift the focus to possible futures that we can build together. We drew inspiration from various existing design theories and methods that focus on envisioning futures. But then, future means many different things, and people experience time very differently. For example, people with post-traumatic stress disorder are often reported to experience a sense of foreshortened future. So we asked ourselves, during our previous 2012 workshops, were the participants thinking sufficiently long-term as we hoped? And how can we better position participants to reflect on time in our next envisioning workshops? With these questions in mind, we developed 2 new multi-lifespan design methods that address time in a very explicit manner. The first method, we named it multi-lifespan timeline. With this method, we explored 200-year time frame, which is very broad. And then the second method, we named it multi-lifespan co-design, where we explored 20-year time frame, so it's more concrete and focused. Together, these methods complement the previous envisioning method, which address futures in more general and open-ended terms. We explored these design methods with a total of 51 Africans from Rwanda and its neighboring countries who are currently living in the United States. Last summer, in 2015, we traveled to 3 locations, Texas, Indiana, and Maine, where we could find a large community of Rwandans. The first method we introduced is multi-lifespan timeline. As you can see in the picture, we installed a big timeline on the wall. This timeline is approximately 4.5 yards long, so it's about 4 meters. Having the year 2015 marked in the middle, the timeline traces back 100 years all the way to 1915. Prior to the workshop, we, the research team, populated the past 100 years with a handful of example social events and technological innovations. So for example, World War I and World War II, the computer ENIAC in the 40s, Rwandan independence in 1962, first spacewalk and the Voting Rights Act in the United States in the mid-60s, the emergence of Internet and AIDS epidemics in the 80s, the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and the first generation iPhone in 2007, so on and so forth. And then we opened up the space for the next 100 years where participants were encouraged to fill the void. We asked what might happen in the next 100 years, societally and technologically, and when would it happen? So participants were encouraged to think in terms of both time and quality of changes that can happen over multiple 100 years. This is an example of what the timeline looks like after the activity. Participants called out ideas about what things might happen and when, and we, the workshop facilitators, wrote them down on a sticky and put them up on the timeline. We told participants that we are not interested in predicting the future. We asked people to be creative, that we just wanted to hear anything that they can imagine. All ideas were welcome, justification was not needed, and critiques were not allowed. Importantly, each participant was asked to take a strip of blue tape to mark their presence on the timeline. The blue line represents from birth to roughly when a person becomes 75 years old, one for each participant. The purpose was to help participants to visually position their own lifetime within a larger movement of history spanning 200 years. And this is what we found. We found that, perhaps unsurprisingly, most of the ideas, visions were clustered towards the nearer future, particularly within the next 50 years, with decreasing number of items as the time moves further into the future. And yet, in all three workshops, we saw participants generating some interesting visions for the longer-term future that went well beyond their own lifespans and well beyond the timeline that we prepared. For example, this is a participant saying, in like 300, 400, 500 years, it will be de-extinction, bringing back dinosaurs and all extinct animals, which is a cool idea. We observed an interesting strategy that some participants used to make sense of time, especially into the longer-term futures beyond their own lifespans. We called it mirroring. For example, a participant reflected on Nelson Mandela's imprisonment in 1964 and the U.S. Voting Rights Act in 1965 and said, so in 50 years, everybody will have freedom. By looking back on the distant past, these participants were able to calibrate looking forward for a similar length of time. Next, we engaged in multi-lifespan envisioning. This method was reported in detail at SIGCHI 2013, so I'm just going to skip this part. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer it later. And finally, in the workshop, we engaged in multi-lifespan co-design. The purpose of this method was to move participants' attention from a broader range of visions to a very concrete instantiation of a very particular future information system. Specifically, in this case study, participants were asked to focus on 20 years from now, which corresponds to roughly one generation in the future. Also, I want to remind you that the year 2015 marked the 21st anniversary of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. So 20 years seemed like an appropriate length of time that will make a lot of sense to our participants. Participants worked in groups of 3 to 4 persons. With each group, we provided a spec sheet where we outlined specific design tasks. To give you more context, I want to let you know that as part of the pre-workshop activities, all participants watched together 4 short video clips selected from the Voices from the Rwanda Tribunal interview collection. And then later during the co-design, we asked participants to choose one clip from the 4 interviews that we watched together earlier, and to imagine a future audience who's watching the same clip in the year 2035. We asked participants to create stories and sketches about an information system through which future audiences will access the video clip 20 years from now. During this co-design, we observed another interesting strategy that participants used to make sense of time. We call it sequencing. Here's an example story that one of our participants' group created. Maria is a 47-year-old woman, a lady, who was raped 27 years ago when she was a young lady. She tried to live with the pain and struggled through her young life. She came to know Sexual Abuse Counseling Network 15 years ago, and she made a decision to forgive her perpetrators and violators, the people who violated her. And she has since married and has 1 child and a husband. Today, she is one of the biggest voices of the Sexual Abuse Counseling Network. This story illustrates a survivor of rape taking gradual steps towards healing over a span of 27 years. Here's another example. In this sketch, the participants first envisioned 5 years ahead, and from there on, added another 15 years to arrive at the year 2035, showing a gradual unfolding of the reconciliation process. So in many cases, participants were dividing 20 years into smaller chunks, typically in 3 chunks, and then creating a sequence of those time segments. To summarize, we developed 2 multi-lifespan design methods, experimenting with several different time scales: 200 years, 100 years, 75 years, and 20 years. In response, participants reflected on and articulated a wide range of time from a nearer-term future to 300 years or more into the future. We also identified 2 interesting strategies participants used to make sense of time. which point us towards potentially fruitful direction for exploring multi-lifespan design thinking in future work. For example, we can employ methods such as storyboarding to better support sequential thinking into the longer-term future. Finally, we identified more categories of multi-lifespan design problems in addition to those Friedman and Nathan identified in 2010. In particular, qualitative analysis of our data shows that participants often considered infrastructural changes and the process of evolving sociopolitical consciousness as types of problems that require longer-term multi-lifespan solutions. These, of course, are only a few beginning suggestions for what is likely a rich area for future HCI design research. I hope these ideas will stimulate new HCI research that takes the longer multi-lifespan view. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Osama Mitatla. I'm from the University of Bristol. Thanks for an interesting talk. Not really a question, just a comment. I wonder if you haven't done so already. It seems to me that you might benefit from the parallels that exist between what you're doing and research done in the field of future studies. I'm not sure if you're aware of the field. It's been around for a bit, but the idea with future studies is exactly what you're looking at the future in the really long term. And you already, I can see already some techniques are that have parallels with this. For example, visioning, but there are also things like backcasting and future reals, which provide sort of more concrete, more techniques for thinking about concrete things to do now, which will impact the future. So just thought I'll point this out.
Yeah. I guess I wasn't particularly familiar with the specific community that you were talking about, the future, but
future studies, yeah.
Yeah, future studies. But we did look at a lot of existing design theories and methods that address envisioning, and then some of the limitations that we've felt was that when we talk about future, it's often abstract, like future in terms of there is no very explicit communication of how far into the future you're talking about. So that was one of the motivations that we come up with these very specific methods where we communicate very explicitly, like what point in time we are talking about into the future. So.
Right.
So we hope that these methods will be used in many different fields as well, not just like participatory design, but yeah, in the envisioning. Like we know that in ubiquitous computing, there's a lot of envisioning going on, and so on and so forth. So yeah, thank you.